And so when we go inward, I wrote about this recently, and I just want to bring it up again. Part of what we want to do when we get super triggered, I mean, one of the things I said in the newsletter is that I wanted to talk about why we get so triggered and what to do about it, is that we have a lot of unhealed past patterns. And in some ways, you could think of some of the things going on in the world today as the karma of unhealed and unworked through inner work. It's the collective karma of us not doing our own work. That is one way of thinking about it. It's not the only way, but it's just a frame that I would suggest you play with. If every person began healing the trauma from their past and helping the people in their own circles of influence have a healing response to the traumas of their lives, we might be creating, nurturing, growing, cultivating very different kinds of humans on the planet than the collection of humans right now that are overridden by fear. And when we are afraid, we tend to fragment. When we are afraid, our vision narrows, and this is where I want to go a little bit into what happens in our body. When we are afraid, all of our survival systems kick in. And when your survival system kicks in, and you'll remember we talked about this in Human 101 in Module 1, when your survival system kicks in, your vision and your ability to see the big picture will narrow, and you will get hyper-focused on what is right in front of you, okay? And when you no longer have access to options and choices, you end up reenacting old survival patterns that come from the consciousness of me versus you. You see threat, you perceive threat, you see other people as enemies. Your reptilian brain, when your reptilian brain kicks in and hijacks your biology, it sets you up to fight with people, to avoid people, to freeze up, to go into anxiety, to not see options, to get debilitated. And then if you begin to get your energy back, to mobilize into a fight response. And then when you mobilize into a fight response, you're bringing aggression and anger and judgment. And what you're going to be drawing from the other person is the same thing. When we are in a fear state, we are activating our nervous system, and our body wants to pull us into fight, flight, and freeze. And so psychologically, we judge others, we judge ourselves. We avoid, we go into denial, we pretend things aren't happening, we get completely worked up about things that we can do nothing about. So that's the reptilian brain. You'll remember in the brain science, actually I'm not going to do that. You can go and look in the module. The other part, so you've got the reptilian brain, then you've got the limbic system, the neocortex, and then you've got this beautiful, beautiful thing called the prefrontal lobe. And in the prefrontal lobe, we have the ability to envision a future that does not yet exist. And the prefrontal lobe is also the part of your brain and biology that is able to regulate all other parts. So when we get triggered, our reptilian system has hijacked our biology, and we start reenacting old patterns because we're perceiving a threat, and we're starting to make enemies of other people. When we begin developing the witnessing self, so in nonviolent communication, the very first distinction of developing the observer self, observation versus evaluation, when you start developing a witnessing self, you begin to develop the practice and ability of watching your reptilian brain hijack your body, but your consciousness doesn't follow. Your sense of self stays grounded in the witnessing self. You don't identify with your response. You're identifying with the part of yourself that is able to watch yourself. And that is one of the very first steps that is needed if we're going to begin to move into courage or transformation. If we're not able to disidentify from the reactions of the body and also stay present to the reactions of the body, we don't have the material we need to start getting creative with. Is that making sense? So in the first consciousness, your body has a reaction. You think that's who you are. You also think that that's the truth of the world. And then you react out of a fear response, with a self-protective or an aggressive relational response to whoever's around you. When you've developed a witnessing self, you're doing two things. You're not moving into denial, which is I suppress everything and I bypass the body and I bypass the information and I'm in denial about it, and therefore I'm just living in the disembodied mind. And you're also not allowing the reactions of your body and the data that you're getting from your biology to hijack your sense of self and your truth, and then getting aggressive and self-protective in the path. You then need to learn how to inhabit yourself. And what do I mean by inhabit yourself? For people who have had trauma, they don't want to live in their bodies. They don't want to know what they're feeling. They don't want to know what they're needing. They don't know what they're feeling and needing. And also, if you've had some degree of trauma, you don't want to know, because the body was a source of pain, and you protect yourself by living out here, outside of your body, in your mind. And you actually see everything that happens in the body as problematic. So there's a bypass that happens. What we want to do, if we want to actually expand our capacity for love, connection, and care, is that begins by moving back down into our body. And so you bring your consciousness back in, and it's a little bit like, imagine yourself getting into a wetsuit. You start pulling your little spirit back into your body, and you start stuffing it into all the way down into your toes and all the way down into your fingers. And you almost need to visualize yourself coming back in and expanding back into your body. And you know you're doing that when you have the awareness of whether your toes are warm or cold. So if I were to ask you that right now, do you have any idea what the temperature of your foot is? You may or may not know, depending upon how much you have practiced inhabiting your physical self. So if you don't have a clue, you can't even feel your foot, you may have some work to do there. And if you know right away, then it's fairly easy for you to get back in and inhabit the body. But that's one of the things that we want to be able to do. And the next thing that we learn how to do is we want to align our heart with what is emerging in the present moment. So in these conversations about political realities, about the end of the world, as some people are putting it, about all of the fears that we're having, the practice is to get into the present moment and to find out what is happening in me in the present moment, in this relational space between you and I, whoever the other is, right now. And it is about bringing all of your attention and consciousness and energy down into the here and now, this moment. What is happening in my needs? What are the needs that I'm having? What's happening in my feelings? What feelings are coursing through me? What are my longings? What are my deep desires? What am I reaching for? Acknowledging, but not being ruled by, my fears, the things I'm hoping to avoid, the things I'm hoping to move away from. But that's not the driving fuel when you're living a big-hearted life, okay? The driving fuel in a big-hearted life is an embodied sense of self that is making conscious choices about the deep desires that human beings are reaching for in order to make their lives better. And the way that we practice that is by getting into the present moment. So Wendy, you were saying a little bit about how when you were talking with your daughter, you were trying to get into the present moment, and she wanted advice. And so all I would say there is I would allow advice to be in the present moment. And I wouldn't resist what is arising in the present moment. It sounds like you're really longing for some advice and some solutions. You're wishing that I had some magic bullet answer that can soothe you and make everything feel better right now. Is that what's happening right now? So you can begin talking about what is going on between you and I and what longings we're trying to meet in the now. That's a lot of the practice, because that's all healing happens in the present moment. It doesn't happen in the ideas about everything going on out there. It's a waste of our energy. But the healing that we really need to start lasering in on is what's arising in me in the now and what's happening between you and me in the now. And then the last thing that we really want to put a lot of focus on is harnessing our imagination. We want to start focusing on the world that we are working for. We need to start imagining the kinds of relationships that we want And we need to change the conversation away from everything that we don't want into what we do want. Because once we know what we do want, we can take practical steps to get there. The other conversation, we can just crawl into a hole and hide in our closet and hope that things don't happen. And if they're going to happen, they're going to happen. But in the meantime, the question is, who do you want to be? Have you healed enough of your past? Can you sit with the pain of yourself and other people? Can you sit with the feelings that are arising in the room? And can you get deeply connected to the deep, deep vision that you have of the relationships, the world, and the way of being that you want to be in the world, and then find practical steps to get there in spite of all of this nonsense that is happening out there in the world? And not from a place of denying it, not from a place of pretending it's not happening, but from a place of harnessing your energy to do something about it in your circle of influence. So those are the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about. Okay, triggers. It's very difficult to heal or to do it differently when you are triggered in the moment. So when you are triggered in the moment, you want to the degree that you can, try and get your witnessing self online. And like Karen was bringing up at the beginning of the call, Karen, one of the things you talked about was you noticed it. You weren't as identified with the experience as if the experience was happening to you and there was nothing you could do about it. Even though the same thing was happening, your ability to make meaning of it, perceive it, name it, detach from it, identify it, was supportive in and of itself. And it gave you access to different choices. And so that witnessing self, you begin tracking everything that's happening in you and then everything that's happening in front of you and between you and other people. Inhabit yourself, witness yourself, and have compassion for yourself. Basic practices. And understand that when you are in fear, then your stress response system is going to kick in and your nervous system is going to want to hijack your higher mind and get you to act out of your reptilian brain. And when we act out of our reptilian brain, we're in a dualistic part of our consciousness, and we're going to want to fight or flee. So in the nonviolent communication communities, sometimes there will be an implicit idea that these are bad things to do. And I just want to say, I would do the practice of welcoming any of them and knowing that you need to have them all fully online and that all of them are good. It is really adaptive and helpful to freeze sometimes. There's nothing wrong with fleeing a situation when it is beyond your capacity to cope. And sometimes we need to fight in order to protect something. So I don't want to make the mistake of thinking that the only good way of being is to be collaborative and synergistic and in higher mind. And it's not a realistic way of living for a lot of people. And it's not helpful for us to bring a judgmental consciousness to all of the different tools that we have available to us. What we do want to do, however, is remember the power of your imagination and understand that you want to develop the skills and capacities of your prefrontal lobe if you want to be living a life that is grounded in a loving, nonviolent, and courageous response to life. And if you're not doing that practice, the default will be for you to slip into fear and control and judgment. And nothing wrong with that. That's your default. That's the ground of work that you are starting in. And the human journey, as I see it, is about developing our capacities and our consciousness and our compassion to be able to live more fully in our courageous and loving and big-hearted selves.